The General Manager's Perspective. Former New York Mets General Manager Steve Phillips joins the Fangraphs Beat the Shift podcast to recap the winter meetings, talk about the landscape of the free agent market, and discuss the new baseball rules. All that and more with guest Steve Phillips coming up next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, and we want to welcome in a special guest to this show. Currently has the show, the leadoff spot on MLB Radio. You might know him as the former general manager of the New York Mets. He also was a color commentator for MLB 2K9 through 2K13 video games, and he recently has played in the Tout Wars 12-team draft. Welcome to the show, Steve Phillips. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing great. That's right. My claim to fame is the voice of the video games. And I got to tell you, of all the things that I've done, taking a team to the World Series, all of that, my boys think the coolest thing I've ever done is doing the voice of the video game. They absolutely think that is the coolest thing.
Absolutely. That's why I began the show with that, obviously.
Exactly. I like it. I love it.
Well, thanks for joining the show, and as we do on the show, we get right into it. And, as a general manager, we wanted to get your take just on the job itself. And, you were a general manager back in the late 90s, early 2000s. How do you think that the general manager job has changed from the time that you were there till now, especially with the use of analytics?
Yeah, the game's changed a lot. Yeah, it really has. I think that general managers are much more involved in the managing of the game than they've ever been. When I was general manager, I put the team together. I would give information to the manager, but I'd let him make decisions, and then I would judge him based upon the job that he did with that. Now, front offices really, I think, get much more involved in the lineup creation and the analytics departments and sharing information and almost sort of nudging managers and the decisions, getting them to lock in on making decisions before the game, which and I've been down that road when you're, even with a general manager with an owner, once you say something to the owner, they want to hold you accountable and not understanding that it's fluid. Things change, things adjust. You have to be able to adapt on the fly. And I think a lot of managers feel locked in that way. And so I do think there's been a lot of changes. But the analytics have taken the game to a whole nother level. I was general manager, I guess, when the book Moneyball came out. And so all these years later, 20 plus years later, we're sort of looking at it and understanding it differently. And, we've got teams that still practice. Where do I find values? Where's that edge that I can get? You've got other teams that are trying to practice Moneyball even when they have money. And so it's an interesting phenomenon, but the game's still, the beauty is still there in the game. It's still that beautiful, amazing creation that we all love so much, even if sort of the way to create teams and evaluate players has changed. The beauty of the game is still there.
Yeah, this is the Fangraphs podcast, and I do have to ask about stats and analytics here. When I'm looking at a very quick stat for, hey, who are the best hitters and who are the best pitchers, I'm using like WRC plus, and I'm using strikeouts minus walks for pitchers. Do you think that any of the teams out there are using a very quick metric? I know that maybe about 10 years ago, the Marlins were using ERA literally as, okay, if pitcher's good, let's just rank him by ERA, and there you go. Do you think any teams are sticking to these simple analytics, or most teams are going to the complicated array of stats?
Yeah, I think that they get to a complicated array of stats, but I think that when initial conversations happen, I think like you did, they would go to weighted runs created plus or OPS plus, and they'd look at some numbers and make a quick judgment and then say, all right, let's dig in deeper on these guys, because that at least gives you a general sense. It doesn't tell you the whole story, but it tells you a little more of the story than some of the, like, I still do interviews where people ask me about guys batting average and RBIs, and I'm like, that's not really what we look at much anymore. You know that, right? But no, I do think that in at least an initial blush, and even for listeners, I think an initial blush, weighted runs created plus can tell you a lot about a player, but there's digging in that you need to do. How did he arrive there? What approach does he take? What style does he take? How's his hard hit percentage and barrel percentage? And so there's a lot of different things to be able to look at with it. But certainly, I think that teams in initial conversations, may look at certain numbers before they do the deep dive.
Right. So I'm looking at this offseason so far, and it's been a thrilling one so far. I mean, I don't remember seeing that many $200+ million contracts in the span of 2 weeks ever. I can tell you for a fact that never happened. With all the analytics today, I got to imagine that some of these contracts really don't lift up to snub on oh, sure, a player is really worth $40 million for 13 years. Do you think that the recent acquisitions have been more market economics, so we're talking supply and demand driven, or do you think that no, actually it's a combination of analytics and old school marketing?
Well, I think it's I gotta say that I'm not convinced that analytics has come into play nearly as much this year in signing players as it has 5 years ago. I mean, 5 years
Right.
ago, teams were not signing players that were 33 years old to long-term contracts, and guys like Jacob deGrom weren't getting 5-year deals, even if they were Jacob deGrom, and guys like Aaron Judge weren't getting 9 to 10-year contracts because Albert Pujols did and Miguel Cabrera did, and those contracts are not turning out all that well. And so I think it's really interesting, that whatever, I guess it's like this, when a woman has a baby, it hurts. And if you ask her, do you want to have another baby? Right after she delivered the first baby, she would say no. But then, selective memory kicks in. And somewhere down the road, she's like, yeah, I'd love to have another baby. And so she forgets. It's the same thing. Like, do we forget? We forgot, for a while when the Pujols and Cabrera contracts were right in front of us, and the pain of those and how they sort of were failing on the back end, everybody's saying, we can't go down those roads. Nobody's going to do those. 30-year-olds, 31-year-olds don't get 10-year contracts anymore. Well, we have selective memory. I guess we forgot. Now we're willing to give 11, 12, and 13-year contracts to players. And some part of it, I think the justification is that we're going to lower the AAV by adding years on. That I'd really only like to do a 10-year deal with Carlos Correa for $350 million. So let me do it for 13, spread the money out a little bit more. I get free deferred money, and it lowers the AAV of the deal. Maybe that's the justification, but it's not analytically driven. It's financially driven.
Well, with all these new signings and everything, the winter meetings, this is when it all started. All the major signings started when the agents meet with the players and everything like that. We've had 3 signings of shortstops of 11 years or more. Who do you think so far has been the best, the winners and the losers of the winter meetings and of the free agent signings so far?
Well, I certainly, I like what the Phillies look. I'm a big Trey Turner fan, and Turner's one of those players where, the performance in 23 can expect it to be better than the performance in 22 just because of rule changes. His value has gone up. Range is going to matter more as we ban the shift. Well, he's the second fastest guy in baseball. Stolen bases matter more because the bases are bigger. We're limiting the pitchers throwing over to first base. And so a guy that's like, I think he could be a 50+ stolen base guy next year. And so I think that it's funny how just with the rule changes, players' values have changed in certain directions. A guy like Tyler Anderson, who signed a 3-year, $39 million deal with the Angels. I look at it and think, well, here's a contact pitcher, no shift anymore. He's not going to be as good next year as he was last year. He's just not. And last year was an anomaly from what we've seen in his career. Those kind of guys, contact pitchers, are, in my mind, going to be a little bit less without the shift. And so I think that there are certain players whose values have gone up. Turner's one of those guys. And I think we always say, well, speed guys don't age well. But one, he's the second fastest player. And so it's from where do you start when you decline. It's not that you're going to decline. And so he may become slower over time, but he's still going to be one of the fastest players in the game. And with the rule changes, he's still going to be an impactful player that way. So, I think the Taijuan Walker, the signings there that they've made, I think they've done a nice job overall in Philadelphia. I would have signed Aaron Judge. I think the Yankees did what they needed to do to get it done. In some ways, you can think to yourself, well, it was one of the greatest negotiations I think we've ever watched. I think the agent did a tremendous job with the negotiation. The radio silence ate at the Giants and it ate at the Yankees like never before. Like there were times when they just wouldn't hear anything back. And it ate them up. And we could hear like Aaron Judge get interviewed and the Giants like, we don't know what's going to happen. And so, but in the end, the Yankees get him. Sure, they paid him $65 million more than what they had offered previously, but they got him at below market value because the market said he was worth 10 years at $400 million, and they got him at 9 years, $360 million. And so in some way, they got him to commit for less than what the market said his value was. I love Xander Bogaerts. I love him going to San Diego. I didn't like the contract. I wouldn't have given him 11 years. I know they spread the money out a little bit with it, but that was, I think, a bit high. I love the player, even though, analytically, defensively, he's probably not there. But maybe next year, Manny Machado opts out of his contract. And so Bogaerts could move over to third base and protects them some in that way. And so I like Josh Bell going to Cleveland. Cleveland can't, power costs money in free agency, and power arms and power bats. And small market teams can't tend to do it. That's why they have to develop their own power impact players. But for 2 years at $33 million for a switch hitter for a team that was ranked 29th in home runs last year. In fact, they had 127 home runs as a team. That's literally half of the 254 that the Yankees hit last year. And so they needed power. So those are some of the signings and deals that I like. I think that there's a lot of them that I thought were really good, really thoughtful. I mean, a lot of money being spent on guys. But I think that there are some that I think are worth the investment in the impact player. And then some where I think they got a little bit under the radar and got a bargain on it.
So according to Fangraphs projections on an AAV per WAR basis, so comparing the money versus the value in terms of WAR, Jace Peterson, one of the best signings of the year, 475 AAV for 1.4 WAR, and number 2 on the list, Brandon Nimmo, projected WAR by Fangraphs of 5, even though it's a $20+ million AAV. That's actually one of the best AAV per WAR. At the bottom, you got more pitchers there. Taijuan Walker, Noah Syndergaard projected poorly. Of course, all the relievers. Kenley Jansen's actually projected pretty poorly on an AAV basis. Worst hitter projection, Jock Peterson, 19 million, almost 20 for only 1.8 WAR, comes up pretty lame. And I was talking with my boss the other day and talking about the Yankees and Aaron Judge. Well, one of the issues, though, with the Yankees, and I don't really see the Yankees as a tremendous winner. I think they sort of held par because to me they just spent $360 million and their team isn't any better.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. Yet, from a general manager's perspective, one of the ways you look at it is if they hadn't invested the money that they did, what was the alternative? What was the pivot for the Yankees? Because when you have one player, when you think about when the Yankees didn't win this year, when they weren't right, it's because their offense wasn't good enough. So even with Aaron Judge's 62 home runs, they needed more offense. And so if they had lost Aaron Judge, the difficulty you have in building a team is, okay, where do you pivot to? Because there's not another outfielder that's going to be like Aaron Judge. You could go get Brandon Nimmo. He's a really good player. But that's a 5 WAR. Judge was a 10 WAR. And so, okay, that's great. So now where do you go? And you think, okay, well, let me go get one of the shortstops. Well, if I do that and get an impact shortstop, that now gets in the way of the young prospects that I have that I'm building for my franchise for the future, and I block their pathway. So if I don't want to do that, then I go, okay, let me go get another pitcher. But, you might end up needing 3 different players to equal what Aaron Judge's value was to the team, and it's going to probably cost you $60 to $70 million to sign those guys. And so yes, in some ways you're right. The Yankees, you've spent all that money to stay where they were, but if they hadn't, they couldn't get close to what they were and probably couldn't get better than what they were for the same amount of money that they're going to spend. And so I think it's a really unique one. I get it. There's a certain way to look at it that where they only held par, but they staved off what I think could have been catastrophic for them.
Yeah, I mean, the Yankees were sort of forced to do that. And he also means a lot on an advertising basis. He's the face of the Yankees. It's tough to go out of that. One thing I do want to ask you, as we've asked our previous guest, and we deal a lot with risk here. It's not just the valuation, but it's risk. And a question comes up, the Mets had a decision, and they let Jacob deGrom go. They signed Justin Verlander. With that obviously it's a matter of value, but just in terms of pure risk, who do you think is the riskier player for next year? Is it DeGrom or Verlander?
Oh, DeGrom by far. Yeah, I don't even think it's close. I mean, listen, Jacob DeGrom made 26 starts combined over the last 2 years. He made 11 starts this year. And so, and without having anything surgically addressed and corrected, and, he's had his elbow flare up 3 different times over the last several years to where his inflammation in the elbow. And, it seems, I mean, from my experience, it seems pretty clear there's something going on there structurally. And that scares me. Verlander had it fixed. He's back. In fact, I think Verlander was the least risk of DeGrom, Rodon, that entire group. I just think that he went out through 175 pitches. He's 2 years removed from Tommy John surgery. Sure, he's 40, but he did not show any real signs of decline. And so my inclination is, maybe they used a 6-man rotation in some ways. Well, that's okay. I don't mind adding depth to pitching. That's one of the things that we've learned is the depth of starting pitching is critical. The Astros had all fresh arms at the end of the year, and I think from the Mets' perspective, they need to do that too. When you think about Scherzer and Verlander and Carlos Carrasco at 36, and Kota Senga, who's only pitched once a week in Japan. Ideally, they really could use a 6-man rotation to sort of piece that staff together moving forward. So I think Verlander was the least risk of the starting pitchers that were the key front end of the rotation guys.
And speaking of all those Mets signings, Steve Cohen seems to have plenty of money to keep doing this, and there's no reason why he wouldn't, because he can. But will there be any repercussions from the Mets going over the quote-unquote Steve Cohen tax? And is it good for the players, baseball in general?
Well, I think the repercussion is, owners are going to be mad about it. But, there is a penalty that comes, and now he's paying 90 cents on the dollar for every dollar spent over $300 million. So one of the things to consider is, what if they want to do an extension with Pete Alonso? So Alonso's going to make, let's say he's going to make $15 million this year for just the sake of discussion. But when it comes to an extension, his AAV might be $30 million. And so, if that's the case, then they're going to be spending money on money they're not even spending. They're going to be taxed on money they're not even spending this year, because the AAV is going to be twice as much as his salary is going to be this season. So that's a repercussion, is that they're way out there, and it's 90 cents on the dollar. So, it's $1.90 for every deal. So, $10 million is $19 million over on the AAV. So it's not insignificant. But look, I think it's good for baseball. I always thought George Steinbrenner was good for baseball. I thought that small market teams should be grateful for the Yankees and George Steinbrenner, and I feel that way about the Mets, is that, one, we need a villain in the game, and so if that's who that's going to be, we'll let it be them. But what happens is, and it showed this all the time, whenever the Yankees would go into town in small markets, the fans would come out and watch them. The home team that was the ones that didn't like the Yankees, their fan bases, they would come out and watch the Yankees. The team would generate more revenues. They'd have more money to be able to spend on players. They'd get more in salary and luxury tax in revenue sharing because of the money that they're bringing in from the luxury tax. And so I think the game's better when you've got teams spending money. I think the game's better when the large markets are healthy. And so I think it's really good for baseball, even if some of the small markets are going to complain, and even if it does create, a sense of disparity. What we've seen is, when's the last time we had back-to-back World Series champions? I mean, not since, 99, 2000 with the Yankees. And so it's been a long time. And so money by itself does not guarantee a championship.
And with all the spending this year, what do you think either Juan Soto or Shohei Ohtani will get on the open market if they make it to the open market? What kind of contracts are they going to get? They can get over $5.5 million. Are they going to break that mark? Are they going to get more than Mike Trout has gotten in the past?
Well, I think Ohtani's got a chance to, $45 million a year. Maybe it'll be $50 million a year. I do. I think the Dodgers seem to be resetting this year and not going over the luxury tax threshold, the competitive balance tax threshold, so that maybe they get in on Ohtani next year, and that they can be the team that spends and gets him. And if they go over next year, they're a first-time offender. So I think Ohtani's going to get the big payday. I worry that Juan Soto is going to regret that he turned down $440 million. He was not the same player this year. Now, whether it was talk of the contract, whether it was, all of the speculation about, turning the negotiations going on and how much is he worth and turning down 350 million, turning down 440 million, with Scott Boras saying they're 100 million short. I mean, the player I saw last year is not worth $440 million. And so it's going to be really interesting to see him get back on track. Now, he had a down year and a bad year. It's still really good. But I want to see that same guy come back again before I start saying that I'm going to commit $440 million. And I want him to start caring about playing defense in the outfield and not be a liability out there. So I think there's some things. Now, he's young, and here's the thing. What 23-year-old is going to handle the conversation about turning down, 350, 450 million and not feel some stress and pressure about it? I get it. But yet he did, and I need to know that he's that same guy still as he works his way back and tries to get back on track again.
Yeah. You had Juan Soto since he joined the Padres. He had a WRC plus of 130. Daniel Vogelbach went to the Mets, WRC plus of 144. So, that's very, very interesting. And you might be right about the Soto versus Ohtani. I want to talk a little bit about the new baseball rules. Next year, we're talking about pitch clock, bases, no more shifting, and, of course, the balanced schedule. What's your take on some of the rules? Do you think that those rules, or maybe some of them, are not so good for baseball, some of them are good for baseball? Just wanted to get your general take on them.
Yeah, I think they're all good for baseball. I really do. I think that Rob Manfred, people are going to look back at this and think, well, this is going to be part of his resume when he gets inducted into the Hall of Fame at the end of his run as commissioner. I really do. I think this is huge. The stolen bases are really going to change the game. 4.5 inches is a mile. When it comes to how many times on a stolen base do we go to review on a bang bang play and the guy's just out? Okay, now he's 4.5 inches closer. He's safe. And it's going to change the whole dynamic about how much teams run and the limitations on being able to throw over to first base twice. And then the third time, if you don't, the runner gets advanced anyways. Is going to be a factor. You're going to see runners steal third more as well, 4.5 inches closer. And so I think it's really going to be an interesting dynamic, and the limitations on throwing. Banning the shift, we're going to get more singles. Now, I don't know necessarily whether it's going to change hitters' approaches. I just think the miss-hits, where they're still going to try to hit it over the infielders and over the outfielders and over the wall, the miss-hits will find more holes. And we're going to have a lot more base hits. I think we are. I think it's just inevitable that we're going to get that. And then more speed on the base is a factor in it as well. Plus, the hitters in the box are closer to first base than they were before. So infield hits are going to be more than they've been. Trey Turner, a big beneficiary of that. Shohei Ohtani, going to be a big beneficiary of that. And then, the other thing is the pitch timer is going to be really, really something to watch, because I think we're going to have a lot of energy early in the season about it when it gets enforced. So Kenley Jansen. Kenley Jansen going to the Boston Red Sox on a 2-year deal. Kenley Jansen is the third slowest pitcher in tempo and with nobody on base, and he's the slowest with runners on base by about 10 seconds and 11 seconds. And so the difficulty is, you understand, for a veteran pitcher, what he does with that extra time is he recovers from the pitch he threw, and he musters up the energy for the next pitch. When you're going to make those guys throw it more quickly, you're going to have more misfires. You're going to have guys missing spots more. They're going to get to fatigue more quickly. It is going to change the dynamic of innings and mistakes that pitchers make. And some guys aren't going to be able to do it. Now, for Kenley Jansen, it's interesting. Runners are either going to steal on him because he can't hold a runner. I mean, you look at the stolen bases against him. I think it's like 95% success rate. And then if he doesn't, well, then, he's so slow that they're going to advance the runners anyways at some point by adding their balls to the hitters and everything else. And so I think that's going to be interesting. Noah Syndergaard, check out his stolen. He's had seasons where he's had 41 stolen bases against him and 3 caught stealing. Now, supposedly when he was with the Phillies, they found out something about what he was tipping and everything else with tipping base runners off. But that is, the Dodgers signing him is going to be really interesting because, they're great at fixing guys, but they're going to have to not only fix his pitch arsenal, his velocity, but also holding base runners. And so I think the rule changes are really going to make the game interesting.
And do you think the rule changes are going to make pitchers change their repertoire and try to focus more on strikeouts or pitch more inside or outside? Or may we even see an alternate shift maybe in the outfield and have outfielders move to the to left field or right field or move them around more?
Yeah, interesting. So we asked managers that question at the winter meetings, and they all sort of chuckled, saying, "Well, we're all thinking about these different things." And so, could you see a two-man outfield with one of the outfielders move to the rover position? I think you can. And trust me, the Tampa Bay Rays are going to try it at some point for sure. But again, the sense of being burned in one of those situations, the penalty is going to be a lot more than it was before when you could shift infielders. And so I think it's still going to add an element to the game of excitement and intrigue with what's going on. I think that when it comes to pitchers, I think the biggest issue is going to be, and I think the fatigue factor. I worry about injuries. Now, somebody told me that injuries went down in the minor leagues with the pitch timer. I watched minor league games. I'll tell you what, it's great. It's a much better product to watch because there's less time downtime between the action, which is what they're doing this for. But when you got these veteran guys who are 40 years old, who have thrown thousands of pitches in their career, you think Max Scherzer's going to like it when Angel Hernandez calls time, said you missed the timer, and we're going to put a ball on the count for the hitter? I mean, they're going to go nuts over some of this. And so, which again, it's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be great for us to talk about. But I do hope that this is gentler than what I anticipate it's going to be.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. The young guys will be okay with it. The older guys, the old crew, they're going to have the most difficulty with anything in life, right? Hard to teach old dogs new tricks and that kind of things.
Now you're talking to an old guy here, Ariel. You're talking to an old guy here, so watch it.
Well, hey, listen, I value older. To me, older is more experienced.
Okay,
but,
good recovery. Nice recovery.
More knowledgeable. That's what it is.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, look, with the analytics departments, they had a spray chart on everybody and they had a shift for everybody. They're going to do the same thing again, but it's going to be a different shift, right? You're still going to have the shortstop move over. He's just not going to go on the other side of second base anymore, right? It's still going to be the same type of analysis, just that there's now a limiter, right? You can't put anybody everywhere. You have to put somebody on the infield.
But I will say, the one thing there. So I was a middle infielder when I played the Mets minor league system, and you can't line them up right behind the pitcher because you can't really see there. So he's going to have to be a couple feet over to be able to see the pitch go to the plate, to be able to see the ball come off the bat. And so, we can say, well, he can still be just right behind the pitcher, just on that side. He's going to have to be over a little bit more. So it's going to be a couple more steps than we think. I think a lot of people think, well, it's because you really being able to see, and then where's the umpire going to be standing with a runner on first base when you're playing over there? And how do you be able to get the view and for the umpire not to be in the way? So there are some things to be worked out with it. But you're right. It's still not. I personally would have put hash marks on the infield. I would have made the infielders stay within certain hash marks, leaving it to where what used to be a ground ball up the middle would still be a base hit or a real shot at a base hit. I would have limited even more how they would have been able to move and put hash marks. Look, we put hash marks on the football field. Nobody even notices them anymore. But I don't think they were ready to be that draconian with what they're doing with the rules.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, and I would not be surprised if they did that. We'll certainly see how everything shakes out. I just wanted to ask a question or two about you personally. Can you tell me who was the biggest influence for you in your professional career?
Well, when I first started, Joe McIlvaine and Jerry Hunsaker and Frank Cashin were my sort of people that I learned from. Frank, longtime executive, the Orioles and then the Mets, and won championships with both. And then Joe McIlvaine, one of the best scouts I've ever been around in his days with the Mets, and those early '80 Mets teams with Strawberry and Gooden and those guys, and all the guys that they had drafted and signed and brought into the organization. I mean, I got drafted in '82, in '81, 1980 was Strawberry, 1982 was Gooden. Now, obviously, '81 was a lesser year because I got drafted that year, but they they went on that great run, and Joe McIlvaine, one of the great scouts, and then Jerry Hunsaker. An underrated executive in baseball, came in with the Mets, was the farm director, then the assistant general manager when Joe left to go to San Diego. And then Jerry got, the Houston Astros job, did a great job building that team. They won the championship the year after he was there, but left, but was a very good executive, then went to the Rays as well. So, those guys certainly, Billy Bean's always been a buddy. I played in the minor leagues with him and had an impact there, being around, you feel like you learn from everybody. Al Jackson, longtime Met player, and he was my manager in rookie ball in the Appalachian League. And we were horrible. Our team, we lost our last 18 games, and we would have kept losing. The season just ended. But he was a pitching coordinator, a pitching coach for us, and just one of the great knowledgeable guys about pitching. Dave Wallace, one of my assistants, a brilliant guy. Omar Minaya, one of my assistants. And here's the thing: you don't just learn in baseball from the people above you. You learn in baseball from the people around you. And so like Omar Minaya as an assistant was great. He was my ideas guy, where he'd start throwing out ideas, throw it against the wall, see what would stick. And Omar would make a suggestion, and I'd go, no, I don't think so. Then he'd make the same suggestion the next day, and I'd go, no, I don't think so. Then he'd make it again the next day, and I'd go, no, I don't think so. And then the next day, I'd make the same suggestion to him, and he goes, oh, really? I wish I had thought about that. Because he sort of got me warmed in, because general managers tend to say no at first because it's safer, gives you time to digest and to evaluate and all of that. And then you learn from other general managers like John Schuerholz. I mean, John Schuerholz did it for so long. I told John Schuerholz and Bobby Cox that if I ever had to pick them out of a police lineup, I'd have to have them turn around, because in my 6 years as general manager, I only know what they look like from behind, because we could never get in front of them in the standings. They were always ahead of us. And I could never, I never knew what they looked like from the front. But, I think you learn every day from people. I learned every day from Eduardo Perez on MLB Network Radio, and Xavier Scruggs on there, and the guests that we have. And so I think that's sort of thing. And I'm sure it's the same for you guys. We're sure we may have had primary mentors, but every day we learn something and hear something different from somebody in baseball that we're like, I hadn't quite looked at it that way. That makes sense.
Would you ever consider becoming a GM again? I mean, it looks like a fun time to be a GM for the Mets right now, but would you ever consider being a GM for, say, another team or even the Mets if they asked you?
I wouldn't. I think that here's the thing about it is, and I don't think people quite get it. Those jobs, it's a lifestyle. It's not a job. And it is, 162 games, and then the work starts. And, the days of my kids are growing up, but the day of saying goodbye to my kids at 7:30 in the morning, and then seeing them the next morning to get them on the bus again. That was it. I'll see you tomorrow at 7:30 in the morning. I wasn't going to see them the rest of the day. It's a lifestyle, and I the way I obsess about numbers and success and failure and everything else, it physically it eats me up. And so it's much better for me to be a general manager for all 30 teams. At the end of the day, no owner or owner's son calls and says, what are you doing? Nobody's feeling any pain. I don't have to deal and answer questions to the media. And I can just sort of talk about it and lay my head down at night, not feel the stress and pressures of it. And the competition part that I still get satisfied with is just trying to do better in media, being able to educate people more, trying to say things in a way that make it easier for people to understand the way people in baseball think.
Yeah, no, definitely. And speaking of competition, I know you were in Tout Wars last year. Are you planning to still be in it this year?
I certainly hope so. And for me, it's an absolute honor to participate with the best of the best in fantasy. Fantasy is different, but it's much the same. It is. And so like people always say, well, the fantasy, no, the fantasy is one, the same passion exists among team owners and managers. And two, it is a way of thinking when you're a general manager, and people who succeed and who are the experts in fantasy have that way of thinking. It really is truly a way of evaluating and thinking about the game to try to put it together.
I couldn't agree more, and I look forward to seeing you on Tout Wars weekend. I think it's about St. Patrick's Day this year, just a couple of short months, so that'll be great. Steve, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I know you do the leadoff spot every single day. Anything else going on you're working on these days?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of TV work now with MLB Network as well. I'm north of the border in Canada. I do the Baseball Insider National Baseball Guy for TSN, which is sort of the ESPN of Canada. And that's Valley Sports out of Chicago. So, yeah, I got a lot going on and just love being able to talk about baseball every day. And certainly the radio show on MLB Network Radio prepares me for the rest of the day with what's going to happen, what I'm going to talk about. And so some good folks, and really grateful to be working with all the different people that I am in the different outlets.
Absolutely. No, amazing stuff. Ruvain, why don't you just tell everybody what's going on with you?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates during the course of the season, after the season as well, during the off season. I also have a weekly injury article coming out for Rotoballer during the season to keep track of all the injuries and the next players up.
All right, and I'm Ariel Cohen. You can find my work over at Fangraphs and Rotoballer. And the ATC projections, number one projection system, according to Fantasy Pros. Of course, I just said that to impress our guest here. But ATC projections coming out about 1 month. So get your calendar set and use those for your drafts. You know, we do, and all the folks do. I know the NFBC does. I know plenty of guys who play on CBS, Yahoo, ESPN do. So that's coming out in just a month. And, of course, you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs every week. We'll be weekly starting in January. We'll probably have one more episode before the end of the season. Once again, thank you so much to our guest, Steve Phillips, for coming on the show. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.